Drema Gross, our next speaker, is the division manager for the water in the Water Conservation Department, and I can tell you that is not an easy job. You know, and I can tell you, I've been with the city for 7 years, and I know there are lots of people that are trying to figure out the best answer, but this drought is really serious. And even though we're getting some rain now, it's not filling up the lakes. You drive out to Lake Travis and you'll see it's not helping that much. And so I asked Drema to come today to help answer our questions about what's going to happen with, you know, are we going to go to stage 3, and why is that happening, and why don't we know yet? And so I'm hoping that she'll be able to answer those questions when she gets here. She has nearly 15 years of experience. She's worked with energy and water conservation. She's also active with the Alliance for Water Efficiency, and there she is. She has a degree in environmental science and policy from Duke University, and as I mentioned, she is currently the water conservation manager for the Austin Water Utilities. So here comes Drema. Thank you. Let's welcome her.
So we're going to find out whether or not this is the right slide presentation. This is what happens when I start from a different base and add some things to it and forget to change the beginning. Clearly, it's not January 31st. But what I am planning to talk to you guys about is the drought and what we can expect in the future from both water restrictions and a water supply standpoint. Here we go. There's the real slide. So yeah, water conservation and drought response. I love this graphic because I really wish that we could program our temperatures and weather to be ideal so that we would get rain when we wanted it. You know, it would slow off and have a nice cool summer when we wanted it. That's not what happens. So what we are looking at, I wanted to show you sort of where we were last fall. And this is when we all started to get really aware of the drought. We were aware of it beforehand. We knew it was coming. But last September, when we put into place our stage 2 water restrictions, this is how red the state was. And while I don't expect you to be able to read the little numbers there, the darkest area of red is exceptional drought. It's the worst stage, the worst classification. 85% of our state last September was in the worst, most extreme drought stage, in exceptional drought. 100% of the state of Texas was in some kind of drought. And 100% was in at least moderate drought, 99% in severe drought. So it was bad, and it was bad everywhere. By January, we are better, but there's still a lot going on. 99.5% of the state is still in some level of drought. We got that little corner up there by Oklahoma that's doing all right. But other than that, 99.5% is still in some level of drought, and 83% is in severe or worse. It goes severe, extreme, exceptional. When you look at this, see that nice little red heart of Texas? There has been little to no improvement in Central Texas. And yeah, we've gotten some rain recently, and that's great. You know, we all like to see that. It's been falling in the wrong places for us. It has been recharging the aquifer some, but it's just not falling in the right places to really recharge Lakes Buchanan and Travis. And that is where our stored water supply comes from. In the Colorado River, LCRA maintains those as a backup for our river rights. So they've gotten a little bit better. Travis and Buchanan have come up maybe 30,000 acre feet, which is pretty significant. As a frame of reference, the city of Austin will use anywhere from 150 to 170,000 acre feet every year. So 30,000 it's a good chunk. It's nice. But it's basically kept them at about a steady percentage. It's basically offsetting just a little bit more than what would normally come out of the lakes to serve firm customers. We would need about a year's worth of rain within 3 months to bring an end to this drought. And there is nothing on the horizon that suggests that's even remotely possible. So we would really need a lot of rain in the right places, the right time. It's happened before, but the weather reports right now are not looking at like that. We work pretty closely with LCRA, and I go to a number of presentations and speaking engagements where I'm usually preceded by Bob Rose. He's LCRA's meteorologist, and he gives the weather report that everybody kind of groans when he gets up there. They really intend on what he has to say, and they're also kind of scared to hear it. And I got really excited for a second because I saw a map where it looked like we were going to return to normal conditions maybe as early as June for rainfall, and then I started thinking, what is normal rainfall in June and July and August? So it looks like La Nina is going to persist. And La Nina for us means hot and dry for us in Central Texas. This will be our third year of La Nina conditions. And just looking historically, there haven't been that many times when we've had 3 La Ninas in a row. And what Bob says is that about 60% of the time, the third year is a La Nina, and about 40%, it's either El Nino or what they've started to call La Nada, which is kind of in between. Yeah, I love it. So there is a good chance that La Nina will go forward. I think, we probably will not have a record-breaker summer like we did this past, but we're also not looking at a 2009 fall where it was just a deluge and we came out of that drought pretty fast. So one of the reasons that our drought has been so significant has been the water inflows to the Highland Lakes. And this graph shows just through last August, because it's the one where it started to get really dramatic. Those light blue lines are our average. This is what on any given year over, hundreds of year history, this is what you would expect to see coming into Lakes Travis and Buchanan on an average year. So this is a month-by-month basis. You can see it starts to get more March, April. May is a huge month, a little bit in June. In July and August, less rainfall. In 2009, which was the first time we implemented Stage 2 restrictions in Austin, once-a-week watering, those gray bars, they're really hard to see, but they were significantly lower than those blue bars. The numbers down at the bottom, the January to August totals, an average year, 885,000 acre feet. In 2009, 192,000 acre feet. 25% of the water we were supposed to get in 2009. During that same period in 2011, that's the green bars. You notice how they disappear at the end? That's not because this graph was put together too early. Our totals for 2011 during the January to August period, 74,000. Remember those other numbers? 885,000, 192,000, 74,000. So when we say this is a really bad drought, we mean it. It's looking a little bit better now. You can see the green bars are the end of 2011, and then the gray, first of 2012. We're doing a little bit better than last year, but we're nowhere up where those blue bars should be. So we expect to be in Stage 2 conditions at least for a while. I also want to talk a little bit about where the water goes in our basin. Some of you may be familiar with this. We're finding as we talk to people that a lot of folks really aren't. We hear comments from all sorts of people on the spectrum, everyone from saying, we shouldn't be allowed to irrigate at all. Why are people putting water on the grass? We're not going to be able to fight fires. There are other people who say, it's raining, we shouldn't have any restrictions. It runs the gamut. And regardless of how you feel, a lot of people look to Austin as a leader, and they expect us to do something in setting the pace for everyone else. What gets lost in that translation is actually the impact that we can have. And I need to give you a disclaimer. First off, I'm not saying by any means that my job is unimportant or that what we do to conserve water is unimportant or does not make a difference. It absolutely does. It's good for the city. It's good for the environment. And it's good for us financially. We have a lot of benefits to conserve, and we're going to keep doing that. But I think it's also important to recognize that Austin alone can't keep water in the lakes. The way that LCRA manages the water in the Highland Lakes is set forth in something called the Water Management Plan. And that's a document that is accepted by the TCEQ, and with that approval, LCRA determines how water is released to both firm customers and interruptible customers. Firm customers are usually municipal customers, sometimes some energy plants, and interruptible customers are often downstream in Matagorda Bay agricultural users. For the most part, they're rice farmers. And in a normal year, there's enough water to satisfy everybody. In a drought year, this water management plan governs when some needs take precedence before others. But when you look at this is in 2011, again, the January to August period. The total inflows to the lake are shown in the light blue. So that's where you saw before, all of those dropping off. The City of Austin's diversions are in the light green bar, the one in the center. And so what you can see from this graph is that we're using, with the inflow so low, a big portion of that. But we increased just a little bit in April, May, June. We're somewhere on the order of anywhere from 10 to 20,000 acre feet a month. Some of these irrigation releases can be that much in a week. The red bar are agricultural diversions from the Highland Lakes in 2011, in the worst drought year any of us have ever seen. Those look just a little bit taller than what we're taking out, maybe? Yeah, it's a big impact. And so one of the reasons that when lake levels fall, they fall fast, is because right as we're getting into heat, evaporation is a big cause of water, or a big cause of lost water off the lakes. But right as we're getting into that summer heat where evaporation is going to be high, they start diverting water from the lakes. LCRA's water management plan, again, they operate and manage Buchanan and Travis, both for flood control and water supply purposes, and they determine how the water is allocated among customers. They say, we can give you a contract to withdraw this much because we're confident we have that in storage and will have it in storage. TCEQ approved an emergency request that lets LCRA deviate from their current water management plan. I'm going to skip ahead a slide and maybe come back. This is an outline that we look at a lot in my department about how LCRA determines when to release water. And I know it's very, very busy, but at each of these points, there is a step that LCRA takes to try to maintain the lake levels. And it also governs what they can release downstream and not. So, when they hit the first line, they cease interruptible for all but, not the first blue line, but the first black line. They cease interruptible for all but 4 major irrigation customers, except those are huge users. At the next line, they start to reduce what they release for environmental flows. At the next line, they gradually curtail interruptible supply, and they curtail, or they ask firm customers to put in voluntary measures to reduce. Each time we go down, there's a little bit more taken off of environmental needs, and a little bit more taken off of firm customers, and then they actually do a curtailment once we hit that bottom line that's in black. That's 600,000 acre feet. It's this criteria for a drought worse than the drought of record, and that's where they're going to stop sending anything to irrigation users and ask all of their firm customers, cities, to cut back by 20%. What has been happening is that we are crossing all of these thresholds after irrigation customers have taken all the water they need. The way that LCRA currently determines things in their water management plan is that they have a plan where maybe November, they take a look at what they think will be in the lakes as of January 1st. And as of January 1st, they do open supply. If the lakes are high on January 1st, or going to be high, irrigation customers, you can take whatever you need. The lake levels fall, they start all the process. They could cut back on irrigation, those guys are done, so they cut back on firm customers. And so we are restricted in the amount of water we can use and take, or we're being asked to restrict the amount of water we do take after all of this water has gone downstream. Now these guys have a business, they have families, they have senior water rights, but they're also supposed to be interruptible. So we've been working very, very closely with LCRA and a number of other users and stakeholders to try to adjust the plan so that we don't get into this situation in the future. We've made some great progress, but this is a long-term problem or a long-term issue. I think it took 7 years for TCEQ to approve their last water management plan change. The 2001 water management plan is what we operate under now, and it was just approved in 2009. So 8 years. It takes a while. We don't think that it will take this long once they come to agreement, and we're pleased that we've come to agreement with the stakeholders. This new plan will better balance, we think, some of the demands. They're looking at putting in 2 trigger points so that they might be able to reevaluate for the rice farmer's second crop if the lake levels are too low. And they're also going to cease open supply. So you will have a limit on what you can take out of the lakes. That's all going to be well and good. We're hoping that comes up to a vote next week at LCRA's board, at which point it would be sent to TCEQ. And then it's up to them to revise it. Best case scenario, we could have it in place very soon, but it's not going to be in place before, irrigation season. Because of that, LCRA did get an emergency order granted from TCEQ to deviate from current practice. And basically, if the water is less than 850,000 acre feet, irrigation users are cut off this year. If it's between 850 and 920, they are going to be cut back, but they'll still get some water. Right now, we're around 766. So we're hoping for rain, but we're hoping for not too much rain. It's a really, really delicate game. Are we going to fill up to 850 by March 1st? I don't think so. I think we're going to be fine. That would be pretty extreme if that were to happen, given that we've gotten about 30,000 feet in the last couple of months. We're probably not going to hit that trigger. But we've been watching all of this very carefully. And I give you all this information not to bore you to sleep around lunchtime, but because I think it's really important that those of us who use water as part of our businesses understand how intricate this all can be. And, the old Mark Twain saying, whiskey's for drinking, water's for fighting over, is absolutely true as you look at this. So again, this is what's called a stochastic model, and it's basically just some likelihood scenarios of where they think we might be in terms of lake levels in the future. These bottom red lines are drought conditions and extreme drought conditions. It's basically sort of like the 90th and the 95th percentile of drought. We've been tracking right along those red lines lately. And you can see that according to those, it looks like we might cross the trigger for what's called pro rata curtailment. That's the 20% you got to cut back number, maybe as early as June. A few months ago, we thought it could be March. So the emergency order has helped, and the rainfall has helped. So we've been able to put this off, and that's good news for us, because we may have to implement additional restrictions at that point. But what we are seeing is that it would take extremely wet conditions. Even if we return to normal conditions, we're not going to cross 900,000 acre feet, which was our trigger for stage 2, before July. So if we're not back up that and going to stay above 900,000 acre feet for any point of time, we don't look like we're going to be pulling back from once-a-week watering restrictions either. Again, I just wanted to re-emphasize this in perspective. This was from 2009 and the last drought year that we had. We haven't gotten the full breakdown from LCRA for 2011 yet. But it gives you an idea of the different users in the basin, who takes water and how much. We have some water that comes from our run-of-river rights. Basically, if this water is flowing through the dams anyway, or has to be released, we can take from that source. Then there's stored water that is an actual specific release for our use. LCRA has some formulas where they break that down because it all looks like the same water. But in this graph, you can see we used about 15% total from whatever the source. We took about 15% of all the water that came out of the Highland Lakes and the Colorado, and 15% was also lost to evaporation. So nobody has a whole lot of control over that. When you look down just at the blue portion, that's the portion that is actually coming from the lake and would not otherwise just be part of the river. We're using about 6%, which is what all of the other cities in the area who are on LCRA supply use combined. So for a city this size and with the demand we have, that's pretty good. You know, we're lucky in that we have our firm water rights, or our stored, both our stored, backed up by a firm contract, and our run-of-river rights. So we're in a good position as far as having the water when it's available. It's just a question of how long is it going to be available. So we have a drought contingency plan, and that plan governs how we respond to drought conditions as a city. It's required by the Texas Water Development Board. It's also required by LCRA as part of our contracts with them. It sets reduction goals and triggers for the city manager to consider implementing water use restrictions. What that means is that when we hit a certain trigger, either in demand or in lake level storage, the city manager has the ability to take action. It's not automatic. It doesn't mean that he has to do what that stage is. It means that he has to talk to staff, look at weather, figure out, are we likely to be in this condition? Would it hurt us more to do more restrictions? Does that help us? Do we need that to meet our contract goals with LCRA? And in the past, when we've hit those triggers, we have acted. 900,000 acre feet. Both times we've seen that coming, and we have implemented our stage 2 restrictions. LCRA manages the water supply, and they have those trigger points. Ours are pretty closely aligned. There's one crazy number in there that honestly we think was a typo. Somebody translated mean sea level to acre feet, and it didn't really translate. So there's a 681,000 acre feet number. Sometimes you'll hear people talk about that one, and that's something that, you know, we think is a little unfounded. There's no real reason we can see for that to be in there. But our chapter 6.4 of our city code lays out what each of our stages is. So in our DCP, we say we'll do stage 2 or we'll do stage 3 at this point. Our code says actually what is in stage 2. So when we are in one of those drought stages, it is specifically defined in city code. We can't change it. We can't let up on a part of it that we don't like. You know, if it says stage 2, these are the stage 2 conditions. Same thing with stage 3. We do have some specified variances, and we have some other, you know, loophole. We can give some waivers in certain cases, but a lot of it is really set forth and it's very specific. One thing that is very specific is our new landscape variance. We get a lot of questions about this all the time, but it is actually spelled out in code what we may offer, and it's 30 days. You water every day the first 10, you water every other day the next 10, you water every third day the next 10, and then you got to follow our schedule. So you're dropping from that to once a week. That has been a major challenge in this drought because with a little supplemental rainfall, you might be able to make this work. In these conditions, it's really hard to establish things in once a week. So what we have decided as a policy matter is that we very rarely give out those variances because what we think will happen is we'll dump a whole bunch of potable water on a landscape that is going to die anyway and need more water later. And someone who wants to prevent that landscape from dying is then going to be violating our water ordinance. So we've really encouraged people to delay landscaping. For commercial projects, we have worked with our Public Works and our Development Review Department to delay re-veg in a lot of places, to accept bonds, accept, you know, soil controls, erosion controls. We know that's not ideal. And we're working to try to find ways that we can manage this so that it is sustainable over a longer term. But that's what we've done to try to minimize it. The only case right now where we're really giving variances is for single-family new construction. And part of that reason is because, you know, in our discussions with home builders, they have trouble getting mortgages approved for the value of the home if there's no landscaping in place. Because the mortgage appraisers, over whom no one seems to have control, don't have comparable properties. There are no other dirt yard properties out there with silt fencing that kids are going to trip on. They're just nothing else for them to look at. So they look at this and they say, this one has a nice yard, this one does not. It is therefore worth less. Home builder is not willing to sell it for less. And so people can't get the mortgage amount they need to pay. And that's been a complicating factor. So in those cases, we also have a new homeowner who wants their home to look good. They are more likely to be able to stand out and water with a hose than somebody at a commercial property or a, a large municipal or a multifamily project. They are individuals who can make some time in their day if this is valuable to them. So we've agreed to let that go. It's a very, very small portion of the requests that we get. So most of you guys probably know our permanent water use restrictions have twice a week mandatory for commercial and multifamily, and no waste, no running automatic systems during the day. Our twice a week schedule is only applying to everyone once we enact stage 1 conditions. Now those are automatic, May to September every year. And since the last drought, our city manager has chosen to keep those in place. Basically, our code says during these months or as needed or as directed by the city manager. And since 2009, we've kept those in place. No irrigation of any kind other than by hand between those 10 and 7 hours. And, still all of the provisions against water waste. Once we go into stage 2, everybody knows stage 2? You still awake? Everybody loves stage 2, right? Yeah? It's a mandatory schedule for all customers once per week. No automatic irrigation in the evenings. A lot of people don't know that. Please have your customers reset their controllers so you're not watering in the evening unless you have a variance from us. Vehicle washing on designated days, no fountains, no fill valves, no pavement washing. Oddly enough, our code right now does not prohibit washing a house. When I talk about specifics, it's very specific in the code. You can't serve water in restaurants unless requested. You can certainly ask the customer if they want water, it's okay. But we get a lot of these kind of questions. And stage 3, some of you may have looked at our code and see, ooh, is this coming up around the bend? There's about 7 hours that you can water by hand with a hose in your hand on your 1 day a week. No car washing. Your car wash has to be efficient, which means that we've had a certified letter from a plumber saying that you meet some gallon per car limits, but even then it's only for health and safety. Foundation watering only on designated day and during those hours. And you can't add potable water to any pools, ponds. We've got people who are trying to build new homes with pools, but they can't fill them. And apparently you can't do that with a pool and expect it to hold water later. So stage 3 really is looking like a pretty extreme condition, don't you say? We started looking at this, and while we do have some additional restrictions, the director can put things into place temporarily if there's an emergency. The city manager can look at some things for long term. Those are undefined. It doesn't say exactly what those are. So when people look at our code, they want to say, okay, stage 2 means this, and I know how you're interpreting that, and I know what it means, and I know what it's going to mean when we're in the next stage, and I know what happens after that. So I can tell my customers with certainty, this is how it's going to be. These provisions in our code, while I think they're necessary, just in case something happens we haven't foreseen, they don't provide us that. They don't give us that definition about what can happen. Oops. So, our water use management ordinance, that stage 3 is not written for long-term water management. In fact, until a couple of years ago, we didn't even have lake supply triggers in our drought contingency plan. Our drought contingency plan relied on demand. When our demand got to the point where our plants physically couldn't handle it, that's when we would put measures in place, because it must be a drought if they're using all this water. So a couple of years ago, we added the supply triggers, and now that's what's the driving force between enacting some of these provisions. But when that code was written, they were still thinking about demand. So if you're getting up to demand, you're going to cut down all of your peak demand, like irrigation, and then you're going to be able to let it go afterward once you fix the system or do an expansion or the weather changes. That's not the case in a drought. We think this just was not set up for long-term drought. Some people will argue stage 2 is not sustainable in a long-term drought. So we have started a code revision process and a stakeholder process. We have a couple of things that were a council recommendation to incorporate in there. One of those is a mandatory audit requirement for large properties. And these are properties over an acre. The reason I point that one out is because some of you may have a vested interest in what that looks like. We're going to go ahead and do that. but you have an opportunity to comment on who can do the audit, what features are included in that, how that information is submitted, how the scheduling all works. And we encourage you to come out and talk about that. Get your names on our list, and we'll contact you when we have these focused discussions on what that portion of our rules looks like. We also plan to shift to what we're calling administrative water waste fines. Right now, if you get a violation and you don't send in the form that promises, yeah, I fixed this and here's how, you'll go to court. And you have to hope that you actually get the letter in the mail that tells you when to show up. And then you have to sit there until they call you on the environmental docket. Some people want to bring their lawyer. And you wait and you talk to a prosecutor. And the prosecutor takes your $500 fine, probably gives it to you for $100 and says, all right, go on out of here. Unless you're really mad that you're going to have a Class C misdemeanor on your record that you pled no contest to. And then you have to request a bench or a jury trial, and the whole thing takes 6 months. So we're not getting the compliance we want. People aren't getting the sense that this is a good use of their time. By the end of the process, they're more angry than they are like, oops. And so we're looking at doing this as something on a fine on a water bill. It's going to help us implement, reduce our staff time so we can actually spend more time patrolling than we do on paperwork, and make it so that we can actually set these fines to where they cover our costs. Because right now, anything that we collect from fines goes into the general city fund, and we don't see it. So that's why it's been so hard for us to hire more enforcement personnel. So we think this will fix a lot, and we've heard a lot of support from the public, but that's another issue that is part of this revision. And now comes all the part that you really want to talk about, which is our realignment of our drought stages. We've had a couple of great public meetings. We've gotten a lot of good feedback, and we think we know the direction that people want us to go in. We have a meeting on February 22nd where we're going to present that to the public and get some feedback. Did we hear you right? Is this where you think we should be? And let's talk about it. At that meeting, we're also planning to talk about variances. We get a lot of questions from people all the time saying, you know what, my day is on Sunday and my religion does not permit me to do anything on that day. Can I change my day? I'm not asking for more time, I'm asking to change my day. We haven't given those generally. The only times we've given those are a medical condition that prevents you from actually watering, and your home health care aid comes on a Tuesday instead of your Wednesday. We've been very strict with those because they present an enforcement challenge. If we start giving a variance to everybody, then you start having more variances than you do people who are following the rules. Nobody thinks you're following the rules, and they stop. So what we're asking for some feedback on is, tell us what you think really warrants it. How should we document this? We don't want to make it a burden on us. We don't want to make it a burden on people. And we want to be reasonable, but we also don't want to open the floodgates. So those are the kinds of things we're considering in these public meetings, and we really are trying to listen. We want to hear. We've certainly heard from some vocal folks, but we want to hear from the people who work with water on a day-to-day basis, who talk with lots of clients. It's important for individual homeowners to come out, but it's also important for people who see the spectrum of homeowners to come out and be part of these discussions. A lot of concern this year over the tree canopy and environmental needs. Even people who are arguing for, we need to sustain the grass. Turf grass gets a bad rap, but it's holding your soil in place, and I'm on a slope. So should we really just let that wash into the watershed? We've also heard from vegetable gardeners. We do have a variance right now that we can allow vegetable gardeners to continue to water. We think that's an important thing. It's an important direction for the city. And the city's putting a lot of resources and support into that. And so we want to help sustain that. It's a very small portion of our overall water use. But all of these things we think are important enough to actually be part of our code. Not something that you have to rely on whoever's sitting in my chair at the time to say, yeah, I think that's important. We think this is important enough to be actually written and signed off on by council, and you can point to the document that says you get this. So if there are things that are that important to you, please come to these meetings and let us know them. We've had some great discussions, and there's an example I love to use, car washes and car dealerships. I'm sitting there thinking, just as I'm driving by, do these car dealerships in this drought really need to wash those vehicles? I mean, seriously, they're going to sell a car, whether it's dirty or not. How does it matter that it drives? And yet we've got them calling up saying, no, I need to wash my car, I need to wash my car. we sat down, we had some conversations with them. And I tell you, I'm so proud of my staff for doing that, reaching out and finding out what these issues were. Because they sat down with these car dealers and they came to an agreement. And they said, no, we don't want to wash the cars in our lots. We want to wash them just on delivery day. But don't give us one day a week because we deliver all during the week. And we'll only wash that car one time if we sell it. But we have dealer incentives from the factory that are tied into customers who say whether the car was delivered clean or not. So literally, we will lose money if we can't deliver a clean car. We'll take it to any place you want. It doesn't have to be our equipment. We'll take it to the most efficient thing. We'll do it by hand with a scrub brush, but tell us how to do it and give us this little bit of freedom. And so they offered up more than we were asking for because we sat down and had these conversations. And those conversations don't happen unless the people with the issues come talk to us. Because I have a really smart staff, but we are not omniscient. We don't know everything that's out there. And whether that's a technology, whether that's an idea, Jody, I see you back there. He's brought an idea to us that I think we're making really good progress on. And, we're probably going to come to an agreement about a different way of looking at some things. So I want everybody to feel that we want to be a resource. We don't want to be the iron fist telling you how you can use water in your landscape. We want to say, this is reasonable, this is something we can enforce, and it doesn't put anybody out of business. It doesn't do long-term damage to the way the city looks and feels. And so that's really our goal, is how do we best manage our supplies, make sure we have enough for people to drink, wash their clothes, fight fires, without, devaluing those other things that we all find so important. So we're hoping to get this complete before we reach 600,000 acre feet. That is the point where LCRA says, you must. Not will you please, but you must. And so, as I said, we've had these public involvement meetings. I've been so pleased with the turnout and the level of discourse that we're having. It's not like being in Congress at all. It's kind of awesome. And so we've done some exercises to talk about, the effect of our restrictions and how they impact lake levels and what people are hoping to see and what they hate about the code and what they love. And so we've heard support for efficient irrigation of trees and vegetables. That means drip might get a break. So if that is something you are passionate about one way or another, come talk to us soon. Protecting business interests. It means things like not shutting down the car washes in a certain stage. Putting the fines on the bills, we got a lot of support for. A lot of support for having a warning. In 2009, we went with a no tolerance approach and said, if we see it, you're going to get a ticket. We've since changed our approach, and there's a lot of support for changing that to where we send you a notice that, hey, we saw a violation. We've got the documents to prove it. We've got the photos. Tell us that you fixed it. Either send us a receipt from a repair or tell us that, yeah, I promise I changed my controllers. Send that back into us and you're in the clear, unless we catch you doing it again. But if you don't send it back into us, you're going to get a ticket because that shows us that you don't care, that you're not paying attention to this, and you're willfully violating. So that's the process it looks like we're going to go with going forward, even though the fines change to being on your bills. We've seen a lot of support for stronger restrictions, either in normal conditions or early in the drought stages. People want us to do something to let the public know earlier, before 900,000 acre feet, that there's a problem. It's not something that gets a lot of media attention until you see, emaciated cows in a cracking field. Status quo, for the most part, in moderate and severe drought, which is about where we are now. We're in a severe drought right now, heading toward catastrophic. It was kind of an even split. So I say status quo because it was almost an even split between people who thought we should do more than we're currently doing, people who said, we like what you're doing, and people who said, no, you need to lighten up. So that one is still, I think, a little amorphous. I don't want to say amorphous, it's not the right word, but there's still some discourse that needs to happen around those stages and what should be done. And then a lot of people said they want us to be less stringent in the catastrophic conditions, that there is a lot of support for not going to essentially a no watering condition, having something in between once a week, and you can water by hand for 6 hours once a week. So those are the kind of things that we're listening to and we're trying to put into what we bring back as a proposal, a draft proposal, because we'll be really lucky if we get it right the first time. It'd be awesome, and all this would go faster and you would know what was in store a lot sooner. But we are trying to get it done before we hit that trigger, which right now is looking like the earliest is June. What that's enabled us to do is add some more public meetings and make sure that we're having time to go back to boards and commissions a couple of times, give our commissioners time to really look through. We're looking at maybe a council date of late May. So we still need to summarize and discuss the public feedback, make sure we heard people correctly. We need to make sure that the changes, when we start looking at how much will this actually save, meet the goals that LCRA sets out for us. If we say, okay, at this stage you can't serve water in restaurants, that's probably not going to reduce our use by 5%, if that's the only thing we're doing. We need to find a watering schedule that works with our system constraints. And this is something I don't think anybody is aware of. When we, before we implemented our twice-a-week schedule, we had Mondays were the highest use day. Everybody was back from work. They were like remembering to turn on their irrigation systems because they've been out in the yard before and didn't want to get wet. The commercial buildings are coming online, the cooling towers. Monday was huge. The other days of the week were fairly even. When we implemented our new schedule, there are 6 days of allowable watering. Monday is a no watering day. It tanked. And it was really cool to watch all of the pumpage graphs because we could see compliance in the graphs. When we were on our regular conditions and commercial and family, commercial multifamily water just on their days, but residential any days, we saw peaks on Tuesdays and Fridays. When we moved to everybody's on twice a week, the peaks shift to being pretty evenly distributed on any given week between Wednesday and Saturday and Sunday and Thursday. Now the residential are using more than commercial. Exactly what we want to see. You look at time of day, and you can see everything ramp up right after midnight and drop at 10, and then ramp right back up at 7. People are following the ordinance. You might see some out there who aren't, but as a collective, people are following. But what that started to do when we get into once a week is we drop some of those days. And it's been a process for me to learn about how you actually operate a water utility. There are pumps and wells and reservoirs that we manage, and it is in the best interest of the system to keep everything as even as possible. If it drops below a certain point, you start having water quality controls. If there's a whole lot of variation, you end up turning pumps on and turning some off, and you're not maximizing the efficiency. That starts to have climate impacts and all sorts of things. You start to have pressure problems in some parts of the system. If everybody is watering all at once, maybe you can't get enough water to that place. So what we're looking at is a revised schedule for any time that we're in once-a-week conditions, and we need some feedback on that. Will this work? What problems do you see? And the goal of that schedule is to try to spread it out, because one of the initial reasons we went to this new watering schedule that was implemented in 2007 is to manage peak day water use and minimize the amount of water we need on our worst day, because that's what drives treatment capacity. The once-a-week schedule, as it currently is not helping minimize. Twice a week does. Once a week does not help minimize peak, because you're just shoving it all into one place. Your peaks are actually bigger. And you've got guys in our pumping and management divisions trying to deal with 80 million gallon a day swings. You have a day where you have a peak on a Sunday because it's a residential watering day, and you're coming in at 220, dropping down to 150, 170 on a Monday. And God forbid it rains on Monday, you go lower. And they're trying to manage all this and still keep our drinking water tasting right and healthy, and making sure that there is pressure in the system on that Sunday for fire flows and all these other needs. So this is why we're going to that. It will look different. It will be a challenge to communicate. But I think it's important to know the reasons for it. And it will help lower our peaks overall, which is great for us in the long term. We want to define some rules for what we mean when we say efficient car washes or irrigation, and we want to do that with the stakeholders who know about those pieces of equipment. We can read things, in journal articles and manuals and online all we want, But the people who work with those pieces of equipment, car washes, can tell us, no, if you go below 20 gallons per car, you're going to scratch the finish. You know, we don't have that information at our fingertips. You guys do. You know, no, drip is a great idea, drip is a bad idea. All drip systems except this one kind, you know, you should require this kind of rotor head. These are the things we need to know. You should require these kind of plants. Determine the process for water waste fines. We talk about putting those on the bill, and we still need to work through exactly how that's going to work, whether people have concerns, and how to make the process work. A lot of this we're going to do on our end because it's administrative, and we know best how we can do this without too much staff burden, but we also need to hear what's going to create a burden on you. You know, we don't want to have you filling out variance forms any more than we want to receive them. So we need that. And, you know, here again, my other pitch for come out and talk to us. We do have a workshop scheduled on the 22nd. We should have some documents posted from the previous workshops, seeing where we're going on speakupaustin.org. If any of you has visited the city's website recently, when I say should have, you may know why. We're having some challenges even finding our own documents on our own website. So, you know, I love those guys, but it has been confusing, to say the least. But Speak Up Austin is a great resource, not only for this, but for other city involvement areas. And if you haven't been there, I encourage you to check it out, whether you're interested in this part of that discussion or in others. It's a great way to find out what's going on. As I said, we hope to be in council by late May. That can change. If what we bring back to the customers on the 22nd is way out of line, we may need more time to bring that back into alignment. We may be able to speed up just a little bit if what we do is exactly on target and nobody has anything to say about it. But we want to make sure that we're hearing from everybody and giving adequate time that somebody who is just now learning about this can get up to speed and start participating. We're going to continue to monitor the drought, and we're working with LCRA on a couple of fronts. Not only do we have folks working with them on that water management plan to make sure that they pass and get approved those revisions that will give us 2 trigger points, not open supply, keep the water in the lakes as long as possible. But we're also working with them on what will happen if we do reach a pro rata curtailment situation. So we've been working extensively and are actually probably submitting today our documentation that says we deserve some credit for the conservation we've done over the last 20 years in the city. If we hadn't done everything we would have, then we would have been up here. So you shouldn't cut us back from where we are here. You should consider all of this that we've already saved, because it's a whole lot harder for us to cut back to 20% here than it is for this community over here who has been watering 5 days a week and not having any plumbing code or building standards and is using 300 gallons per person per day. They can cut back 20% just by, you know, cutting back their run times a little bit and still water every day. It's easy for them to get 20%. It's not easy for us. We've been working very closely with LCRA and making good progress on saying, yes, we deserve to be here. Cut us back from that level. And what we are hoping is that that level is as close as possible to what we're currently doing so that we don't have to impose more restrictions until the drought gets worse. But a lot of that is still up in the air. So we're proceeding on that front, but at the same time, we're proceeding on the code front so that if we get into a worse situation, we have a little bit more leeway to consider those things people have told us are important: the trees, landscaping, vegetables, businesses. So with that, it looks like I've got maybe 20 minutes or so for questions, because I figured there would be a lot of them, and you just shot your hand right up. So. The question was, when a fine shows up on your water bill, how do you know what you've done wrong, and what are the guidelines for that? Again, it's still in discussion. That process has not been fully set, but what we expect is that we would continue our standard process of giving you a notification first and asking you to send in what we call a compliance form. This says, yes, I have changed my controllers to this setting. I have repaired this head. I have replaced this valve, and here's a receipt that proves it, or here's my signature promising I've done this. And then if you don't submit that, you'll get a fine. We also anticipate, because of billing cycles, we will probably send out some sort of a notification, either concurrent with or just before that goes on the bill, And then there will be an administrative process where there can be a hearing, a review, and someone would have the opportunity to contest it. You could come in our office, see the photos that we've taken, tell us, no, that's really not me, that was my neighbor's, you wrote the number down wrong, whatever these things are, and, have the ability to get that charge reversed. So we have to work with our billing folks to figure out what's the window we need to allow that notification to happen. And I don't know yet what that window is. Did that answer your question? The violations that we have, there are violations that are year-round based on essentially an imperfect automatic irrigation system. And you shouldn't operate the system that is broken. The other violations do apply to people who are hand watering, and we recognize that that is a much lower use generally. Most people are not out there. Right now, hand watering you can do anytime. Hose dragging is still restricted, and if you're doing it on the wrong day, we'll catch you, and you'll get the same, courtesy. And most people will just say, sorry, I didn't realize, I wasn't aware, and then we hope we don't catch them doing it again. Okay. Sir? The question was, how do the modifications of code affect reclaimed water that is going into the system? I want to make sure that we're clarifying exactly what we mean when we say reclaimed water. When we at the utility say it, we mean the highly treated effluent that comes through purple pipes and you pay the utility for. We do not necessarily mean rainwater, gray water, or those other types of auxiliary waters that might be on your site. Currently in our code, reclaimed water is exempt from those restrictions. In this severe drought, we have asked our customers if they would consider following the restrictions, because a lot of that is public perception. There are some people on one side who say, yeah, you want to show them that reclaimed can water whenever they want to because you want more reclaimed customers. There are others, because so many of the reclaimed customers we have are city properties, who are hesitant to do that. It looks like we're not following our own lead. So we would anticipate that those same exemptions would apply. That hasn't, immediately come up. If you feel otherwise, again, I would encourage you to come and let us know, either on Speak Up or by attending a meeting. We cannot regulate the water that we don't sell to you. At least on this water use level. Certainly there is storage and other health and safety concerns. But as far as saying you can't use this water on a Tuesday, no. Rainwater and gray water are exempt. Yes, ma'am. Let me see if I can rephrase a little, because if you're confused, maybe other people are too. I know it's a lot of information. In a worst case scenario, we could hit those trigger points in June. It could be anywhere from June to September, and then maybe not at all. These graphs change every single month. They usually come out about 2 weeks. And each time, we've been lucky to see the date push out a little bit more. So it may never happen. We just don't know. In a worst case scenario, we're looking at June at the earliest. It would be July before LCRA board likely would vote to enact pro rata curtailment, which would mean that our plans would immediately go into effect. What we would have to do at that time is meet a baseline allotment for the rest of the year. And that baseline allotment is determined based on whatever we use during a reference year. In this case, it's September 2010 to August 2011. And our adjustments to it for conservation, and then cut back. So what we basically get is a water budget for the months that we're in pro rata curtailment. My job then is to try to figure out Can we meet that at stage 1 restrictions? Can we meet it at stage 2 restrictions? Can we meet it at stage 3? And advise the city manager. The city manager then determines whether or not we need, or what level of restrictions we need to meet that budget. So when we hit 600,000 acre feet, that does not necessarily mean stage 3 is imminent. What it does mean is if we need more than stage 2, stage 3 right now is what we have defined. So that is why we are continuing to proceed with these code amendments and redefine a stage 3, because we know customers want predictability. You know, you guys want to know what's going to happen to me. And right now, we're like, well, what's going to happen is either we don't know or worst case scenario. We want to find some places in between where you can have relative surety, like you do in stage 2. It's relatively sure that we will need some reductions when we hit this point. We will put in once a week watering, and we will get the reductions we expect, maybe even a little more. Once we get down into these other droughts, we haven't seen them before, and we're realizing that we need to provide some more guidance and detail and expectations. Did that answer your question, sort of, or just confuse the issue more? Okay. Jody? Okay. First off, I cannot speak for the city manager. I don't want to suggest that I'm speaking for the city manager. Obviously, the director of the utility will advise the city manager and tell him what he thinks is right. City manager can, you know, he can do what he wants to. In our drought contingency plan, the 681,000 acre feet trigger is spelled out. So it is a point at which the city manager will consider, do we need to do more? What I can tell you is whether or not we need to do more is a lot of that is going to be contingent on LCRA and them telling us how much credit we can get for our conservation efforts. So that little piece of the puzzle is really what's going to make the difference in, do we have to do more at 600,000? Do we have to do more at 681? Are we going to be able to maintain this? Because if they give us all the credit we're seeking, we may not have to do anything more to meet their targets. And that's really what's going to determine, do we put stage 3 into place? I think we've heard from, certainly I've gotten the direction from the city manager, we've gotten the direction from council, yes, please look into this, please review these ordinances, because we're concerned about what stage 3 would do to the landscape of Austin, literally. Yes, ma'am in the green. Yes, ma'am. Yes. We have a dedicated staff, and I would love to have more of them because, like I said, right now we're wrapped up in a lot of paperwork. And we've got guys who are out there working a midnight to 7 shift, working, an 11 o'clock to 6 shift, and sometimes longer. And they have enough experience now, having enforced this. We even enforce it when we're not in severe restrictions. We just get a little bit more resources. And so I get additional admin resources so that they can spend more time in the field. And they've got cameras, they've got flashlights, we now have lighted signs on our vehicles, because there were a few instances where some people would come and knock on the window and be like, why are you taking a picture at my kid's window at 2 o'clock in the morning? And so now they say water use compliance. When the guys brought them to me, they gave me a picture of a pizza delivery sign, and I thought they were asking for like a stealth mode, that they wanted to disguise themselves as pizza delivery. Fortunately, no, but we have some lighted vehicle signs so that when those cars are being used for compliance, you don't have to look at the little city seal and try to see where it reads Austin Water Utility. You see right up front, this is what we're doing. This is why we're out here. And we want people to see that we're all patrolling. Most people don't think we're patrolling because we're patrolling at 3 a.m. on a Sunday. But they stagger the hours, and they review the patrol schedule. They also base some of the patrolling on sometimes follow up for specific complaints. If somebody complains and says this is happening at Tuesday on 7 a.m., we will try to get out there. That's tough. So a lot of what we do is say, we're looking at our complaints, and we see a lot in this area around this time. So we're going to head out to Avery Ranch and find 70 of these folks. And that's how a lot of our patrol schedules are determined. Yes, ma'am, in the back. Well, those are two separate questions. The question was, how does this apply to other municipalities? I assume you mean our wholesale customers. To clarify, she mentioned Pflugerville. Pflugerville does not get its water from the city of Austin. And I think they may have an emergency supply contract. Sure. Some of the big ones are Wells Branch, City of Rollingwood, Lost Creek Mud, a lot of those smaller districts. In some cases, they are required by contract to have our provisions, but in almost every case, they have agreed to implement them, whether they're required to or not. So most of these places are currently in a once-a-week watering condition according to our schedule. Our staff do not enforce in the ETJ or in those municipal district boundaries. State code gives us the legal right to enforce in the ETJ, but there's still some complications with that because the water users have a different contract in some cases. As those contracts come up for renewal, and these are long-term 50-year contracts, a lot of them don't come due until 2020 or further. As those contracts come up to renewal, customers are being required to adopt conservation plans and drought provisions that are equal to or exceed the city's. But in most cases, we've gotten great response, and they are volunteering and adopting these. I know of one mud right now that is in the process of changing, but right now they're still letting people water a lot. Yes, ma'am, you had a question? Mm-hmm. We have looked into that issue. It is on our list of suggestions. What we really need, if you know people who work in the restaurant industry, we've done a little bit of reaching out, but haven't gotten a whole lot of response. We have had a lot of trouble finding out how much water they really use, and all of the estimates are that it is very, very, very low. However, we are looking at that from a perception issue as to whether or not that should be regulated and how. So if you come to the public meeting and talk about it, you can tell us, what do you think about this? But we do need, if you got friends who work at a restaurant or go to a lot of them, what's reasonable? I don't know if these things can be on a sensor so that they're only, when people are out there on the patio, or if a time of day, when people are likely to be there, if that is more realistic. We need some feedback on that issue. So thank you for bringing it up. Yes, ma'am, in the pink. Okay. The question was, how does Austin compare in our restrictions and regulations to cities in other climates, or in similar climates? And what I will say is, I don't know if it's still the case, but when we looked into it about a year or so ago, Austin was the only place in the country that had year-round, all-the-time watering restrictions. I think a couple now have put those in place. I just haven't gone back and done the research. A lot of places have automatic restrictions in the summer. Every seasonal. I think Vegas is one of those, and they restrict you more in the summer, or more in the winter, and let you water every day during the summer because their ET rates are so high. When you look locally, ours are more stringent than others who share our water supply and don't get water directly from us. Cedar Park, for instance, and this is nothing against Cedar Park. I love Catherine, and she's gone a long, that's my contact there. They've gone a long way to improving their conservation efforts and have hired new staff and are really making an effort. Their current code, they are currently in mandatory twice-a-week watering. They had a voluntary twice-a-week schedule while we had a mandatory twice-a-week schedule. When we went to mandatory once a week, they went to mandatory twice a week. And they have considered going to once a week maybe earlier than they would under their drought contingency plan. Round Rock is on a different water supply, but they have, I think they have been in mandatory twice a week. Most of the places around here have been in mandatory twice a week. Some of LCRA's direct customers have gone to once a week when we crossed 750,000 acre feet. I don't know whether they've released that now that they're back up. It depends. It's some of the direct municipal customers from LCRA. They're very small. As you go a little further south, San Antonio is, we're about the same. We're both in once a week right now. Our schedules are different. They have a once every other week condition that if things worsen for them, they could go into. And I talked with them earlier this year, and they were very nervous about that because, you cannot set your irrigation controller, at least most of them, to go every other week. And how do you manage that with the system pumpage problems that we talked about? And, how do you determine when it's an on week or an off week? Is it the same for everybody? So we talked about some of those issues. They, of course, have a very different water supply. They're on the Edwards Aquifer, and that drops further and generally recharges a little further than the surface water, depending on the rain conditions. I don't know whether or not they got the plant. They did absorb bare mat. So. Yes, ma'am. Wow. Well, thank you for that point. Yes, sir. I'm sorry, I didn't catch the last part. You said the private commodity. Okay. The question was, in my opinion, how long do I think it'll be before I see groundwater regulated sort of on a state level by entities like LCRA rather than traded by private individuals? There are days that I wish I were a lawyer. Those are few and far between. But I feel like that's a question I can't really answer without one. What I can say is that I know the legislature is looking at this issue, and we have some senators who are very interested in how groundwater is regulated. You may have been paying attention in Travis County. They're trying to see what they can do. But there are things like rights of capture when the water is on your land or falls on your land that get into some hairy areas. There are groundwater districts that regulate use that are not, individuals, but those are usually established by the state. They're in certain areas, and they will regulate whether or not you can drill a well or what have you. And, Austin actually contributes a great deal of money every year to the Barton Springs Edwards Aquifer District as part of how those are set up in state. The local surrounding districts contribute some money for their operating expenses, even though we don't get our water from them. So I don't know that I can really answer that question. I can say that I think it got bad enough this year, in this past fall, that people are paying attention and they're realizing that there could be a crisis on our hands. So I do think that the right people have noticed. I think that I don't know if you've ever gone onto the Statesman blogs, but there's a photographer named Jay Yanner. It's spelled Janner, and he's a friend of the family. I think he does amazing work and should get a Pulitzer. But he took pictures of the drought this past year that I think were the most affecting things I've ever seen. And they weren't what most of us normally see. You're right, we can see the lake levels drop, but we don't see cattle starving. We don't see people having to slaughter horses because they cannot feed them. and these pictures capture that. I think some folks at the Capitol saw those pictures, and I think they heard from their constituents, and I think they're going to pay attention. Yes, ma'am. Under our current stage 3, if nothing were to change and we implemented stage 3, they would get about 6 or 7 hours a week to water by hand. I think it's from 6 to 10 in the morning and 7 to 10 at night. Yes. So. Right. Right, and let me clarify, in that 30-day variance, it does not exist in stage 3. In stage 3, there is outright no new landscaping. And, since we require new landscaping for city properties, we kind of got to fix that. That's a conflict in our code. But what I would say from the customer's standpoint who's looking, do I replace this now? Do I wait? What do I do? Obviously, we're getting into the planting season. We are not encouraging planting at this time. If you choose to plant, you should figure on having no more than 1 day a week to water. You should figure on current conditions or worse. That is what I would say. So if you think that on current conditions you can establish a plant, if you think you could do it on current conditions minus LCRA's 20% pro rata curtailment, then you may wish to go ahead and do that, especially if there's some rain in the forecast that might supplement that. If you have another water source, if you have some stored rainwater that you've been lucky enough to collect and haven't used it all already, those are the sorts of things to consider when you're deciding, is now the right time to put in something new? But you're not going to get to nurture the heck out of that. I apologize, I was not here for the earlier presentation. We have a variance form on our website that we ask folks with vegetable gardens to fill out. And given reasonable conditions, if your condition isn't exactly spelled out in there, you can let us know and we'll consider it. But we've asked for basically private gardens where you think you're getting about 20% of your food from that garden. If this is something you need to sustain yourself, sustain your family, even if it's enough that you're giving it out. If you are part of one of the PARD's community gardens or you're in process to be approved for one of those, even if it's another public community garden, we will look into that. What we're trying to do is to make sure that, we're not talking about just one tomato plant, that we're talking about something that people are reasonably using to grow their own food and eat locally and part of that. So there is a variance in process or a variance process. I still have the ability to give that variance in a stage 3 condition. Yes, ma'am. So, right. The comment was that, even though we're looking at some of these practices, we need to change how we landscape and irrigate our lawns or our landscapes. using native plants, soil, and appropriate irrigation, because there should not be a need to water every day, if I captured that. And I think that's a great point. We have some programs and are looking at maybe developing some new ones to try to help people in that direction. And to advise, we've partnered with Grow Green on creating some landscape templates and give people some tools so that they can put in gardens that will use less water and replace some thirsty turf grass. I'm looking closely at the stuff that the Wildflower Center has been developing for new native seed mixes, and and I think that from an irrigation standpoint, we're going to try to do more things as a conservation division to encourage efficient technologies that are proven to work. And so we're really hoping to keep doing that change. I see the drought as having had a real silver lining for our group, because now people are listening and they're looking and they're thinking about their water use in a way they may not have before. And so I think that's important. I will say on the watering every day thing, a lot of the comments that we get, it's not that they want to water every day, it's that they want to be able to water any day. A lot of people have a problem with the specific day that they're assigned. For us, that makes compliance and enforcement more efficient and easier, but for some people that just doesn't work with their personal schedule, or their watering day might be the day that it rained, and they need to put something on midweek. Those are the sorts of things that we hear a lot. Anybody else? Yes, ma'am. What time does it start? Is it 6:30 or 7? I think this one starts at 6:30. You may want to double check our website and speakupaustin.org just to make sure that I'm not wrong, because I'll just be there all day. But the rest of you might not want to show up half an hour early. We'll talk to you if you do, though. The location is in room 104 at the Waller Creek Center. That is at 625 East 10th Street. And that East 10th is actually west of the highway. It's off the South Brown frontage road between 10th and Red River. I'm sorry, between the frontage road and Red River on 10th Street. We usually have the parking garage open after hours so that you can get in there and find a place to park. Yes, ma'am. You say right now under stage 2 conditions, or as stage 3 is written? Stage 2. Okay. The question was, how is hand watering affected in stage 2 conditions? Stage 2 watering conditions, you can continue to water with a hose or a bucket held in your hand, not propped up on your lawn chair, held in your hand at any day, any time. Any day, any time. Did you have a question? Not in our current code. Use of hose-end sprinklers is restricted between 10 and 7. Depending on how you're hand watering, if you have the hose stuck down in your bucket pretty close, we're not worried about that evaporation. If you are using the handheld hose and sticking your thumb in an open hose and spraying it everywhere, it may not be wise to water at 2 p.m. But that's on you. You can do it. All right? Thank you all.